Today we're going to be breaking down an athlete we recently had in the lab, talking about how we diagnosed and began to attack the issue at hand. So, starting off with, we're going to start off with the ground forces here. Start off with the side view just to give you guys a little better look at what we're trying to attack here. So, if you guys are familiar at all with ground forces, you'll notice that a lot of his back leg forces are above average, and we can get into that in a little bit more detail later on. But things like ACL impulse score, his player velocity was really high, which is just how fast he's traveling towards home plate during the loading phase. All of those things were above average for his level. And to give a little context, this athlete is a junior college, a freshman in college, so he's trying to continue to develop his velocity and also continue to hone in his command and kind of just take the next step in terms of his performance. But velocity was the main focus for coming into this assessment. So what we noticed right off the bat is that ACL impulse score, like I said, player velo, all the back leg forces were above average for his level. So that told us that his back leg load was already really good. He was producing a ton of force coming down the mound, that there was some other leak in the kinetic chain. Quickly through the viewing of ground forces and also the motion capture, which we will talk about here in a little bit, we were able to identify that his lead leg block and the transferring of that energy up the kinetic chain with his lead leg was the main contributing factor to him not being able to get as much velocity as he would like. So specifically what we saw during his session, if I switch over to this view here, a few of the metrics that we noticed were clawback. So clawback is a measure of how quickly they can go from peak negative Y here, so the bottom of this red curve. So that's peak force production towards home plate with the lead leg, how quickly he can return to zero after that. So 0.37 is a little bit high for most of our athletes. We want to see them closer to 0.20 seconds. So that was a red flag for us initially. Y front score was also a red flag for us as well. So Y front score is just peak force production toward home plate divided by the player's body weight. This athlete is pretty large. So a 1.17 Y front score would mean that he's producing 1.17 times his body weight towards home plate. For most of our athletes, we like that to be in the 1.2 to 1.4 range, especially in college. And then as they move into the professional ranges, it'll be, closer to 1.5 a lot of the time. Something else that we dove into quite a bit with him during his session was Z front score. So this bottom metric here on the right, Z front score is a vertical force production down into the mound. So if you think about just pushing straight down into the mound, that's how much force they produce at that point at the top of this green curve relative to their body weight. So 1.68 would be a 1.68 times his body weight down into the ground. And we, for our college athletes and really for any of our athletes, we want to see that Z front score get to 2.0 or double their body weight down into the mound. So those are the main ground force contributing factors that we looked at during his session and we explained to him as well. From the motion capture point of view, there are a couple of things that we looked at here that kind of popped out to us as well. Go into the normative ranges and showing where he lines up in terms of those at a later point in the video. But big thing that I noticed here was obviously we have his knee extension angle. So the angle of this front leg at front foot strike. So you can see he had 124 degrees of knee extension on his front leg at front foot strike. And then at ball release, it decreased to 96 degrees of knee extension. So you can see that that angle got lower, and that would kind of give us a good idea of that he had some front knee leak. In an ideal scenario, we want to see that number get bigger between foot strike and ball release. So that was something that is really easy to tell. And obviously, we were getting this data back between each pitch, so it gave us some really consistent feedback as we tested out drills and other things like that. Some other things that fell below the ranges are pelvic angular velocity, so that's just hip speed. Trunk angular velocity fell below the range, and then knee extension velocity also fell below the range. So these are all things that are contributed to the decrease in velocity that he wanted to address. The more stable you can make that front leg, the better able you're going to be able to rotate efficiently. And so we would more than likely see these pelvic angular velocity, trunk angular velocity, and all of the other angular velocities increase as a result of just having a more stable front leg. So here is this athlete's profile within our assessment processor. So as you can see here, we have the pro college and high school ranges. You can see the orange tick mark on each of those is his average during that session, and then the blue tick mark is his peak during that session. So you can see for things like Z back score, he's obviously in the pro range, Y back score, pro range, ACL impulse score, pro range, and then player velocity who's in the pro range as well. So, like I said earlier, all of his loading or acceleration based metrics were all in the very high ranges of college and into the professional levels a lot of the time. What we were focused on mainly was deceleration metrics. So I mentioned that when I was in the Newtforce software, but so Z front score was a primary um, area of focus. You can see that his average during the session was 1.69. You can see that falls into the high school range. We ideally wanted to get him up to this 1.8 or even 2.0 range to get him into those college and professional levels. YZ front score is another one. So YZ front score is total force on the front leg divided by their body weight. So it's Y force towards home plate plus Z force down into the mound relative to the player's body weight. So it's relative to how much they weigh. And you can see his fell into the high school range. And then, yeah, uh, Y front score as well was in the college range, but it was on the lower end of the college range. So those are all things that we were working on. And then from a biomechanics standpoint, if we come here, mainly looking at the angular velocities here. So if we look at pelvis angular velocity, this green dotted line here is the population average out of everyone we've ever had throw on our motion capture system. You can see that his pelvic angular velocity is at the very bottom of that range. So he's not rotating very efficiently at all in the hips. And then also trunk angular velocity, which is just peak upper body rotational velocity, was also at the bottom end of that range. So those are all signs that we want to track and address throughout this process of working to make this athlete throw harder and be more consistent. So here's our athlete that we've been talking about here. This is him with a water log on his back. We use this a lot to help our athletes with lead leg stability and also just create more efficient sequencing and provide a little bit of extra proprioceptive feel to emphasize the lead leg block here. So you can see this is just normal out of the stretch, emphasizing the lead leg block. We are really trying to hone in on how his front foot is striking the ground. You can see here that he's doing a much better job of landing with his full foot into the mound and then rotating around it. You can see Z front score, like we talked about earlier. Our goal is to get above 2.0. We got to 2.5. With Y front score, we can see that that didn't increase as much, so we had to add an additional drill, more focused on Y force production. And then also we added in some strength conditioning recommendations and attacked it from more of the strength conditioning route as well. You can see clawback decreased quite a bit. So he was in the zero point 0.3 to 0.35 range before, and now we're able to decrease that to 0.19. So that was pretty successful overall with improving his lead leg block. And overall, it was a successful session. So he was able to take away a couple of different drills and even if we go to the motion capture piece here, you can see that this discrepancy between front foot strike knee extension and ball release knee extension became a lot closer together. So before he was losing about 20 degrees of knee angle, and now he was staying relatively the same. It was decreasing a little bit, but it was much better than when we began the session here. Initially, he was going from around 120 to 130 range down to like 90 degrees at ball release. Now we can see that those stayed relatively the same. We can see that um, overall, that's going to help him to continue to improve the lead leg block. Obviously, this drill is a very narrow focus, but in the end, it will help to create some more velocity his delivery here.